What are some narratives in 2024 that we just quite frankly aren't buying? There's a lot of things that are said this time of year, and some of them are said out of good faith. Some of them are said out of the effort to get clicks. But what are some things that are being said that, again, they kind of create a narrative that we're just not on board with? And the first one that I think needs to be addressed is that Alabama somehow isn't still going to be Alabama. All right. Now, Nick Saban, it's very true. He is no longer the head coach there. It's been well documented, not just throughout the course of this week with him not getting or not having credentials to walk into SEC Media Days on Radio Row, which is essentially Fort Knox if you don't have your credentials, but also over the course of, I guess, really since he retired. Like, it's been a talking point for a very, very long time. But here's the deal, man. Nick Saban, as good a coach as he is, and he's the greatest of all time, undisputed. Did he make any plays at Alabama? Did he throw any touchdowns? Did he make any interceptions? No, right? So what did Nick Saban do that was really what allowed them to be so successful? Recruited at a high level. That's obvious. Game planned at a really high level. Adapted with the game. The biggest thing that I think he brought to Alabama, which is hard to really pinpoint one, but if I had to pick one, it would be the standard setting. And when I look at the intensity internally at Alabama, from what we can gauge, seeing Jalen Milroe during that spring football game throw his helmet, and again, spring football game now, it's like a glorified scrimmage. You're not really showing too much, but he was pissed. He was upset with their execution that last drive, and he's the starting quarterback. He's not battling for his job, but he was upset with what they had done on that final drive, which is one instance, you're kind of getting a peek into the house via the window instead of actually being in the house, to kind of refer to what Dan Lanning says about how we view football teams. But I think that point stands the same. Jalen Milroe and I would say overall feeling within that operation Tuscaloosa is still dialed into their championship standard that Nick Saban installed, and I think Kalen DeBoer is going to work to uphold. So the idea that Bama is not still going to be Bama, I have a hard time getting behind that. One more thing I'll say here. All those players that Nick Saban brought to Alabama, a lot of them are still there. Now, some of them, especially on the defensive side of the football, haven't played quite as much ball, but doesn't mean they don't still have a whole lot of stars next to their name. So Alabama not still being Alabama, I'm not calling my shot to win the national championship right now, but to say they're not going to factor in, I think is a wild narrative that isn't getting too much traction, but it is getting some airtime. We don't buy that narrative. Bama, I think, will still be Bama in 2024. Now, here's another narrative, that Texas is in for a rude awakening in the SEC. And this is usually coming from the SEC home turfers, is what I like to refer to this group as. Folks that really, instead of being worried about their football team, are more worried about the patch they get to wear on their jersey or the sticker on the back of the helmet that says SEC. They stand behind that logo as opposed to their own team's logo. And I think it's honestly kind of an ignorance is bliss situation, because if you actually look at what Texas has on the roster and what they did a season ago, and quite frankly, what they did in Tuscaloosa, Alabama last year, that myself and Trey Annity saw live in living color, Texas is not in for a rude awakening. Now, will they dominate the SEC? I don't think that's necessarily something that you would aspire to your first day there. But Steve Sarkisian kind of echoed that same sentiment yesterday when he took the podium at Media Days. He said, for us, it's about respect. We want to respect this conference. We want to respect everyone that is a part of this operation. We want to respect how competitive this league has been. But at the exact same time, they need to respect us. And so I think that's kind of the mantra for Texas from an internal standpoint and from a fan base level. And we talked to Jahdae Barron yesterday on this show, and we'll likely get that conversation to you here in the coming weeks. But the overall, I guess, attitude for him was Texas was not satisfied with last year. And if you're a Texas fan, that should fire you up, because in some way, shape, or form, you could pitch the idea to me of, well, Texas, they got to the mountaintop of the Big 12, they got to the college football playoff, they had a lot of folks grabbing microphones saying Texas is back. Great. Okay, you can rest on your laurels there, right? No, I think this team wants to do more than that, and I'm excited to see what they do. Will they win the SEC? Again, I'm not calling my shot right now. We're going to do that here in the coming weeks, but I do think that when you talk about Texas going forward, they will be a top-tier team in the SEC. So I think there's a split opinion on Texas. Some think they're going to be in Atlanta. Some think that they're going to just be absolutely body-bagged. I have a hard time getting behind the latter there. I think Texas will factor into the SEC title race without a shadow of a doubt. Now, speaking of factoring into the SEC title race, this is another one that I think isn't getting enough love, or maybe a narrative that's getting too much love, is that LSU is somehow going to go quietly into that good night, and they won't factor into the SEC championship race. Currently in Vegas, LSU has the 5th best odds to win the SEC. I'm looking at Trey Annity off camera. 5th best odds to win the SEC. Now, I'm not telling you that's an incorrect place to have them right now. There's a lot of good teams in the conference, but I mean, you're telling me 5th best odds? 5th, I mean, what that's telling me is you don't think LSU will factor in. And that's fine. Believe what you want to believe. But to me, to make that kind of a bet is betting against Brian Kelly in year 3. There's several things in the sports world that would make me concerned if I were on the other side of the field. And that was probably Carmelo Anthony when he had the hoodie on. Like, hoodie mellow is a dangerous thing. Kyrie Irving, untucked jersey, would make me nervous. And Brian Kelly in year 3. Year 3, Brian Kelly is a dangerous thing. He has proven on many occasions that he is in his bag in year 3. That's when his team really becomes his team, for lack of a better phrase. Year 3 at Cincinnati, we've said it many times, made a BCS bowl when Cincinnati was a G5 school. Year 3 at Notre Dame, made the national championship. Year 3 at LSU, to assume they're not going to factor into the SEC title race, I think is just ridiculous. Look at the slate they have, not horrible. You got Ole Miss and Bama both in Baton Rouge. You go to Death Valley, anything can happen. And then on the road, you got some tricky ones at A&M and at Florida. But overall, like, the draw isn't horrible if you're an LSU Tiger fan. So they will factor into the SEC title race. I said on the show with Matt Moscona yesterday, I think 10-2 is very attainable for them. And 10-2, just so we're all keeping track, gets you in the college football playoff, in a vacuum at least. So we'll see what happens there. Another narrative we don't buy, man, we just kind of look at, we laugh, we chuckle, that Auburn's going to stay bad on offense. The people that say Auburn's going to be bad on offense again in 2024, that take, I would have to imagine if you said, well, hey, why do you believe that? Well, they would probably start their sentence with something like this. Well, Peyton Thorne, and you can cut him off right there. You say Peyton Thorne? You mean the guy who didn't get spring practice last year? Peyton Thorne, the guy who got there with like 10 minutes to spare and said, hey, learn everybody's names, and oh, yeah, you're going to start at quarterback for us? Is that really fair? Is that really fair? I think where I'm sitting right now, there's a lot more reasons to believe that Auburn will be substantially improved on offense than there is to believe they're going to be bad. Because you look at the one reason of why you would say Auburn's not going to be successful on offense. You say Peyton Thorne. That's fine. That's one take. That's one person. That's your prerogative. But I'm looking at the mountains of reasons for why Auburn will be improved on offense, and the first is Hugh Freeze. Like last year, Hugh Freeze's offense, that was as bad a unit as he's had in his career as a head coach. In his career, he's coached a lot of football now. To assume they're not going to get back to maybe the trend that he's had over the course of his entire career in college football, to me, that makes no sense. Peyton Thorne gets spring practice. I've said that ad nauseum, but also he gets a walkie-talkie in the helmet, and also he gets some weapons to throw the football to. And he gets a Hugh Freeze offense as opposed to being like a Hugh Freeze, Philip Montgomery hybrid offense. There's a reason there's not 2 captains of a boat. There's a reason there's not 2 presidents of the United States. Usually you got to have one voice. If you have 2 voices, it gets confusing. All right? So to have some unison, some alignment, that's going to be massive. I have a hard time buying that Auburn's going to stay as bad as they were last year on offense. Now, what does that mean for them in the win-loss column? I don't know, but I think it's a lot closer to 8 wins than it is 6 wins. Last one here, and this is one that's kind of fun to talk about because A&M's at Media Days today. This is one that has probably persisted from a narrative standpoint, not just this season, not just this Media Days, but really for the better part of the last couple of years. And the narrative is that A&M should temper expectations. A&M is an entitled fan base. A&M is this, A&M is that. A&M every single year, they got all this hype, and then they underperform. Full transparency. The last 2 seasons, we have picked A&M to go 8-4. They went 5-7. We picked A&M to go 7-5. The next year, they went 7-5. So we are not drinking the A&M Kool-Aid nationally like I think maybe a lot of folks would accuse others of. Like, we check the comment section every time we post a YouTube video, and we see folks say, I've heard this guy say this about A&M before. I don't think so. I haven't. I mean, I'm just going to say I don't think those are the same videos that we're looking at here. The narrative going back to this is that they are entitled. They should be national champs. They should be this. They should be that. And I'm not telling you that A&M is going to win the SEC. I'm not telling you A&M is going to be the national champions. But to tell A&M fans that they need to turn their expectations knob down quite a bit, to me, I don't think is totally fair because in college football, one, have not does not mean cannot. Also, you talk about A&M, input really should equate to output. You look at the input for A&M, I understand a lot of guys transferred out from some of those high-profile classes, but there's still a lot of talent on that roster from the way they've recruited. They still hit the portal pretty effectively. Grabbing Nick Scorton from Purdue is going to be a massive get for them. They still have, I believe, a sneaky good wide receiver room with Noah Thomas and Moose Muhammad. They got a good backfield. Like, there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of input on this roster. To me, that can make them really successful in 2024. I do think when you talk about A&M, it is bake over microwave when you talk about Mike Elko. And I said this on TexAgs yesterday when I was sitting down with David Nuno, like, when you saw Nebraska last year with Matt Rule, the thing that we said a lot with them is culture, toughness, structure. That's going to benefit Nebraska. That's the same way I feel about Mike Elko at Texas A&M. Those things, though, you don't necessarily flip the switch. You don't hit the 1 minute express on the microwave and you have it working right away. It takes some time typically for a team to adapt a coach's persona, way of doing things, to be a Mike Elko coached football team. And so the point I'm trying to make here is, if they do buy in quicker than the average team, A&M's going to be really hard to beat. A&M's going to be probably in that range of a 9-win football team. So the idea that A&M's entitled or they have expectations that are too high, of course, there's always that 15 to 10% of a fan base that is unrealistic. But I think A&M fans, for the most part, are really just tracking the input. They get to the output, and they're like, wait, this equation does – someone check the math here. I don't think the A&M fans are crazy. I don't think that they're delusional. I think that the input hasn't equated to the output just yet, but I don't think that means it won't at some point in time. So let me know the narratives that you're not buying when it comes to the SEC in 2024. A lot of narratives right now. Got to keep the head on the swivel. We're going to do it together. I'm excited to hear what y'all think. Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.